But we're here to talk about native plants tonight, which is it's one of my favorite topics. And I hope you enjoy the talk. And in discussing this, really what plants to use sort of rose to the top of what I might be able to share with you to think about in your gardening and your passion for native plants and your thoughts on how to transition your little sidewalk garden or your yard or your field into native plants and how you want to do that. And there's no right or wrong answer, but we'll talk about some things you can think about in that vein. Let's get started. All right. So I come to this topic from a value system. My value system, one of the things that drives me is my love of Virginia's biodiversity. And I'm sure it's what brought a lot of you to native plants. And basically that could be defined one way as sort of our native species that we believe evolved here generally prior to European settlement. Things are evolving every day, but we try to capture the native species that we love that are a part of the North American flora and fauna. And many of you will recognize many of these wonderful native plants and animals, all of which we care for very much. And like many of you, it's very distressing to see what's going on to our native flora and fauna. Many challenges. This is a community near me called Short Pump, which if any of you have been to the Short Pump know, it doesn't look like that now. That was 1994. Here's 2018. And those little red circles are what's left of the Short Pump that existed in 1994. So that's a big challenge, habitat loss. It's often cited as the number one challenge to our native biodiversity. Probably a close second are non-native invasive species, which many of us who have been working on this topic know far too much about. This is Callery pear, also known as Bradford pear. I think I bought one of these in 1972 or 3 to plant in my yard when I was a teenager in Maryland, and didn't have any idea what it could do to the landscape. This is one of the scourges we were talking about at dinner. This is Microstegium biminium, Asiatic stoat grass, and there are many scenes in Virginia and elsewhere that look like this. That range map you see there is about 10 years old now, but that plant was first recorded in 1919 in Tennessee. So we have some tremendous challenges with non-native invasive species as well as habitat loss. And those combined with a third threat, which is climate instability, which is quickly becoming a very important and very salient part of our lives. Those things combine to make it a rough time for our native biodiversity. And so what I hope to talk to you about tonight is what you can do in your own little way, what we all can do to at least bridge that native biodiversity a little bit longer until whatever miracle happens and we can all rest assured those native plants and animals are going to thrive. But we can do a lot. And I'm not going to tell John Starfish stories, but we all have a contribution we can make towards protecting our native biodiversity. And that is why I was very excited to find out more about the wild ones and their philosophy of getting native species into our residential and rural communities. And that's what we're talking about tonight. How do you choose what to do? I saw one of Doug Tallamy's books out on the front table. He's probably the best person to read, the prophet in all of this. And his passion really is for this topic. Please go to do your little bit with your little yard or your little patch of the earth and use native plant species because it supports in the insects that support the birds that support our native biodiversity. So that's what we're talking about tonight. And I'm not going to say anything that Tallamy hasn't said much more eloquently and much more robustly in a collection of books that he had, including this one, Nature's Best Hope, which is in many ways us and what we do with our little patches of the earth. And this is a big challenge. And we've all been there. I own a lawnmower and I have a little patch of grass that I mow and make nice so that I can go out in the yard with my dogs and we can have a place to socially gather that's comfortable. But I am living next door to a person who mows every Saturday about 4.5 acres. So they put a lot of carbon in the atmosphere, and they think it's their job. And I'm not going to argue with that or value system. But what they want to do is make a beautiful green lawn that is in a big expanse. And we can do better. We can do a lot better than this, particularly if our goal is native species, native biodiversity preservation. We have this as an option. And this is not hard to do. And we're going to talk about tonight, thinking about how do we get from point A to point B? How do you choose the plants that you might like to have in your yard? And I'll bet you there's many native plant enthusiasts in the house tonight that could name each of those species. But I just love the aesthetics of it too. Those are all natives, of course. That's switchgrass in the back and Joe Pye weed in the front, one of our native asters, and a goldenrod. And that could be a scene out of somebody's yard right now. It would not be hard to do this. And it's a nice alternative to that green. And it does an awful lot to help preserve our native biodiversity. This is a picture of a grassland that I have in my yard. Black-eyed Susans are a wonderful choice if you want a big patch of something that once you get it in, it's pretty hard to go wrong by or kill. Rudbeckia is the Latin on Black-eyed Susan. So that's our choice. We can do that. So I'm going to give you a step-by-step how I would do it if I were a beginner. And I apologize because many of you in this area are very experienced, and you would know a lot of these steps already. But the one I encourage most of all is to go outside and look around. And what an opportunity you have in Abington. And I will apologize, I'm a Virginia person, so I don't know Tennessee as well. I'm sure there are a lot of wonderful areas just south of Abington, but I'll point out a few that you have close. Way down there is Grayson Highlands and White Top and Mount Rogers. And oh my goodness, what a startlingly beautiful place full of native species. Another great place to go, the High Knob area of Stone Mountain, Tank Hollow Falls, and the trail that's above it, Pinnacle Natural Area Preserve, and Clinch Mountain Wildlife Management Area. I didn't put on here, but another great area to go is the channels. Those are all open to the public, have trails. They're safe, beautiful, and full of tons of native species. So you should really go out there and get to know what you might like, because aesthetically could make a huge difference to your choices down the line. There are a lot of other things that will factor in, but step one, go outside, go see some of the amazing plants that you might want to have close by. These are some tools for plant identification. I highly recommend, if you're just getting into wildflowers in particular, the book on the upper left, the Newcomb's Wildflower Guide. It's an entry drug to plants. It was my entry drug in long time ago. 1980 is when I got into plants, and that was the book that did it. This big fat book that was just pointed out weighs 7 pounds. If you really want to dig in deep and you're a book person and not somebody under the age of 60 that can use electronics, you can use it. It's also in non-book format in that app that was mentioned, the Flora of Virginia app, which is available for $20 rather than the $100 the books cost. And rather than the 7 pounds, it weighs whatever the electrons inside of your phone weigh. So it's a lot easier to use. And I would highly recommend, if you haven't tried it yet, try iNaturalist, which is the app shown second to the right. And I would only caution you, if you use iNaturalist, that it's very easy and satisfying to get a plant identification using iNaturalist, and it works amazingly well, but you don't necessarily absorb the information that you do when you have to key out and figure out what a plant is. It's a wonderful tool. It also is a great citizen science tool, because once you enter a plant into iNaturalist, or a bug, or whatever you might have, it is there for all to know about. So it's creating active range maps of species through our contributions when we used iNaturalist. So all those tools are great if you want to know plants, and they all have their strengths and disadvantages. But the idea is, you may want to just really spend some time getting to know what's outside and getting to know what plants you might want to use in your yard or your plot or your field or what have you. Also, I think one of the things that I really enjoy about being outside is learning about plant communities. So plants have habitat preferences. It's very important, and we'll talk about that when you think about what plants you put in your yard or your plot of land. And there's a way to know them really well, and that's this website that is by the Virginia Natural Heritage Program, which is inside the Virginia Department of Conservation, which is part of your state government. And they have a very robust, extremely robust website where you can learn all about our natural communities. And that has just been put into the Flora of Virginia app like 2 weeks ago. And I'll show you how that might be able to be useful to you later. All right. So now that you sort of thought about your plants and your natives, know your yard and or your land. And so just to caution you, if anybody has a new house, they don't care about soil when they build new houses. They turn everything up, and you probably have a clay subsoil. So that's something to deal with and think about. But there are mainly 3 things to think about: your amount of sunlight, your moisture level, and the amount of soil or the type of soil you might have. If you have an older established, like a farm or something like that, you probably have a more mature soil around your house. Also, construction was less disruptive to the soil layer that in the past than it is now. So you may have a lot of original soil. And then what you can do, there are a couple of options. If you really want to know your soil, you can take a soil sample and send it off to tech and a soil lab to get tested, so you know your pH and your basic cation levels, which can be very important. The other thing you can do is look at your parent rock. So if you're in limestone, you know you're going to have a calcium-rich, high pH soil. If you're on shale, you don't know what you'll have. If you're on sandstone, you know you'll be acid, low pH, and probably low nutrients, particularly calcium and the basic cations. So that's the second step. Know what you're gonna plant into. And then take a look around, because you might already have many native species in your yard already. Red maple, which is pictured here on the left, and to a lesser extent, redbud, are very, very commonly used nursery plants. So if you get to your new subdivision or your house that's been here for 30 years or less, and you look at what they plant, they often plant native trees, particularly red maple, a few of the oaks that can be native. Sometimes you'll get lucky in redbud. Also, if you have, and the lower right is black-eyed Susan, which is sometimes used in the trade. Oftentimes, too, the upper right there is lyre leaf sage, Salvia lyrata, which moves around very freely and can be a native that is already there. So get to know your yard a little bit. You can use those ID tools we talked about, use iNaturalist, go around, take a picture, and find out what natives you might already have. Okay, step 3 is, I said, choose a goal, choose the plants. That's what we're talking about tonight. What plants do you choose? So that can really depend. Like I said, there's no right or wrong answer. You may, for example, you may love pollinators. You might want a pollinator garden. There are great resources if you want to have a pollinator garden. This is the Fish and Wildlife Service. The Forest Service has a guide. This is all stuff you can Google, so I didn't necessarily put up the websites for these. I really love the Xerces Society, which is devoted to invertebrate conservation. And they've probably done a more thorough job of helping people that are interested in pollinator gardens than anybody. So the Xerces Society is a really good, helpful group in that. And I downloaded and wanted to show you this is their Mid-Atlantic plant pollinator list. So if you're going for pollinators, look at those sources, particularly the Xerces Society. Know what soils you have, know a bit about what your plants require that you're going to put in those soils. And you can use that. That's a great way to go. But the idea is, think about what your goal is for your land to decide what native plants to choose. Okay, so this one, I'm going to talk about aesthetics. Let's just say you happen to love purple flowers or shrubs that are evergreen, or trees that produce a lot of nuts for squirrels. Whatever your goal is, the idea is, how do you choose those? So that's what we're going to talk about in this next bit. And this is where you might want to get a Flora of Virginia app. Let me tell you how you use it. So let's say my end goal is to have an evergreen with pink flowers that blooms in April in Washington County and native. Well, what I do with the Flora of Virginia app, which is what I showed them, is I open it up and I find this list and I go to that word, graphic key, and I circle that. And when I do that, I get this. And on this screen, this is the beginning of the graphical key, and that's every plant that's in the Flora of Virginia app, every species, 3,400 and what is it? 48, 3,348. So that's all. So right now you haven't chosen anything. But if you do this and you go to moisture and you say, well, my yard is dry, and you go here to your light regime and you say, I have a sunny yard. You can see how those are darkened around those squares. And then you go down here and you say, I want a native plant. You have now gotten a much smaller group of plants, 1,475 to choose from. But you can go much farther with this app. So you have that. And then you say, well, I would like to have a woody broadleaf plant, and I would like it to be blooming in April, and I would like it to be a shrub. And now, oh, that one didn't work. I don't know why. Let's see what happens. I only have 169 of those that grow in Virginia. That's hard to pick out of 169. What else can we do? Well, let's not have them be armed with spines. And let's have them be evergreen. Now, how many do I have? 12. Oh, this is getting better. So what I can do then is I can click on show, and it'll show you all 12 of those plants. I couldn't fit them all on the screen, but now those are your 12 choices of an evergreen, non-spiny, April blooming shrub that grows in a dry place in sun. You can go even further though, because 12, well, a couple of those plants I didn't know. They didn't look familiar. So you make one last choice and you pick Washington County. And then you have 4. So those are plants that are native to your county that might be. So let's show what they are. So there are these 4. And you see right at the top of the list is mountain laurel. Well, that's great. I like mountain laurel. I forgot that that was even a choice here. So I could go out and get mountain laurel as my choice. So that's a way you can choose a plant using the graphic key in the Flora of Virginia app. It makes it super easy. Now, another thing you might want to do, and this also you can use the Flora of Virginia app, is you might have an affinity for a particular natural community. When I mentioned learning natural communities, you might say, oh, I just love spruce fir. You might have been up at Grayson Highlands or up a White Top and Mount Rogers. You might say, oh, I just love that habitat. So the Flora of Virginia I mentioned now has communities on there. And so you just go to the thing that says the natural communities, and then you get this and you go, I'll look at the list and see if spruce fir is in there. And there it is, spruce and fir forest. So once I click on that button, I learn all about spruce and fir forest because we have a big narrative there. And, oh, I would love to have some of those plants for my garden. I love those. I wonder what Clintonia borealis looks like. So I click on that and I see what it looks like. So you can use this and then, oh man, I wonder if there's a list of all of them. Then you click there and all the plants that we mentioned for that natural community are presented to you in a similar list format on the right. So you can, if you choose, and again, it's choose your goal, choose a plant. You can say, oh, I want to have a spruce fir forest. But remember, you also have to know your land and your yard. So if you have a sunny, dry place, you aren't going to have very much luck with a lot of these plants. If you have a moist, shady, maybe north-facing cool spot, like it's on the north side of a hill or on the north side of your house, it never gets direct sun, it's sheltered, it holds moisture well, the soil is moist, then you have a shot for this natural community. But you can read about the natural community there and you can find out what kind of soils and what kind of moisture regime you're dealing with. So this is all different ways, different tools you can use to choose what plants you might want to grow. These are fairly high labor ways to do this. This is more of if you want to have a journey and learn a lot, you can do it this way. There are shortcuts. And that's the last thing I'm going to talk about tonight. This is a shortcut that's been developed. And if you all don't know about this, you need to, because it's going to make everything I said, well, that's nice, but I might want to do it this way. It's a much easier way to do a lot of what I just told you, not all of it. And I would really encourage you, go outside, learn the plants, get the Flora of Virginia app, learn about the natural communities, do some playing with that graphic key to learn more about what's native that fits certain categories. But a lot of that work has been done for you by a group that has native plant guides for every region of Virginia. And no kidding, the draft went to final on this 4 days ago. And when I was asked to give this talk, this hadn't been developed yet. So I said, oh, I can do this. But a lot of this has been done for you. So I would encourage you to get this, and I'll tell you a little bit about what this has. This is a Plant Virginia Natives Guide. They have done one for every region of Virginia, and this just came out. I'm going to give the website for this and other things at the end. But it's really a remarkable amount of work they did, and they pulled data and information from the Flora of Virginia and other excellent sources. I've actually done some, I did some work on some of the early native plant guides, but I did a little QC post-production on this because I don't always trust that people get it right. They got it pretty right. There's very few errors in this. It's excellent to use. And there's the region that it has, which of course, and I will say the difference between the Northern Tennessee and Southern Virginia, just for y'all, is very, very little. So don't worry if you're in Bristol or Johnson City or even a little farther south. You're going to be fine on the plants you choose using these resources. So there's where it covers. And there are the groups of plants it covers in. I actually downloaded the spreadsheet. It's about 295 species that they've chosen to highlight in this guide. And so you can choose forbs, which are non-graminoid herbaceous plants and non-ferns, herbaceous plants. Then you have ferns and grasses. And then you have woody plants, well, woody and herbaceous for vines, and then shrubs and trees. And for each of those, there's a section like this that shows you a picture and gives you a lot of that information. For example, upper right there is the moisture regime that you can use. For Aquilegia, which is our native columbine, Aquilegia canadensis, it shows that it can use sun or part shade, and it can use a sunny or, sun or part shade, and it can use dry or moist, not wet soils. So it's fairly trustworthy. The other thing this has that is not in any of the other sources that I really like, and it's talked about like a lot by Ptolemy, you'll notice the butterfly and the bird and the hummingbird shown below the Aquilegia canadensis photo. That tells you what functionality it has within your yard. If you love hummingbirds, you'd look for that logo. Again, it shows up down with a Runcus dioicus goat's beard down lower right. You would plant hummingbird plants. You might want that as your goal. So this helps in a way that those other sources don't with that particular bit of information. But it is chock full. Yeah, I think it was 294 or something species amongst those 6 groups as they divided up the plants. And there's, for example, their list. They give you the height, the width, the light regime, the moisture, the page number it's on. And I think it's an excellent source of information. And it is a shortcut past a lot of the steps I talked about earlier. But I really want to encourage you to love plants and love the outdoors and get out there and look for things. Don't content yourself with going to a book and saying, boom, I'll pick that, I'll pick that, I'll pick that. Anyway. All right. So that's steps 1. Being outside and getting to know what's there. 2, knowing your yard and your conditions. 3, deciding on your goal, your aesthetic, and what you want to accomplish, and sort of how do you find the plants that you choose. Step 4 is finding out where you can obtain them. And I'm so glad that I met your horticulture person here and we talked, and it's very, very true that there is a huge lag between what people like you folks want and what's available in the trade. It just is what it is. We're all learning. We're all gathering plants. So you may, if you choose dry outdoors Clintoniana out of the spruce fir community, it may be hard to find that, is what I'm saying. But there are some excellent sources for native species nurseries. I put up 3 here. The first one comes from that Plant Virginia Natives campaign, the one that did that wonderful guide I just showed you. They have a list of nurseries. I thought theirs was a little thin compared to how good their guides are. But that's one. There's another one that you can look for. The Virginia Native Plant Society maintains a list of nurseries. That's pretty excellent. And a little bit more, a little bit fuller than the last. And then finally, I don't know that much about the Virginia Working Landscapes group, but they do have a list of nurseries as well, and a little bit more information than they do on the other ones. So I would peruse those sources for where nurseries might be available. There are a lot of other mom and pop sort of and startups that are happening right now because everybody has realized that the Virginia wild ones aren't the only ones that want this. There's tremendous movement right now in the solar industry and with the utilities and state agencies to use native plants more and more. And so you will see a greater diversity of sources and a greater diversity of plants that will become available in the future. There are plenty right now, but there'll be plenty more. I don't know about cost, but I'm sure it will be coming down to as these technologies and horticultural advancements are made using native plants. These are those websites, and I'll leave this up for a minute. I think this talk is going to be made available somehow. I gave the talk to the folks here, and it might be available through the wild ones. So this, don't worry if you miss one, you'll catch them later. This is the last slide. That was, I didn't time this out, so I don't know how long it took, but I really hope that you guys have questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. And thank you.